Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we sift through your sources to unearth the most important nuggets of knowledge. Hi, I'm Pat.
And I'm Jessie. Today, we're taking a deep dive into something utterly fundamental, something that shapes every single one of us every day, often without us even realizing it.
Yeah.
The intricate, incredible world of emotions.
It's a topic that touches everyone, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And our mission today is to truly untangle the science behind these really powerful internal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to journey from their evolutionary roots through their crucial role in childhood development and right up to how they impact our personal well-being and social connections as adults.
And we've gathered some fascinating material for this deep dive. I mean, everything from clinical research on child development, evolutionary psychology papers,
Right.
to even some very personal accounts from online communities, which are quite revealing. All of it helps us understand what it genuinely means to feel.
So the goal is really to cut through all the noise, the information overload.
Exactly. Offer you some surprising facts, maybe those satisfying aha moments, so you can walk away feeling genuinely well-informed about, well, a core part of what makes us human.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, or perhaps the often confused parts. We toss around words like emotion, feeling, mood, affect, pretty much interchangeably in everyday conversation, don't we?
We absolutely do. But our sources actually draw some pretty crucial distinctions. It's helpful to clarify.
So where do we start? What's an emotion, technically?
Well, the American Psychological Association gives us a great starting point. An emotion is described as a complex reaction pattern.
Okay, complex.
Yeah, it involves experiential, behavioral, and physiological elements. And crucially, it's always a response to something personally significant.
Personally significant, right.
Think of it as like a predisposition to action, a really rapid internal shift that happens because of specific stimuli.
So the emotion is that big, quick, full-body reaction. What about a feeling, then? Is that different?
It is, subtly. A feeling is more the subjective, private representation of that emotion. It's our conscious interpretation, our awareness of that raw, instinctive, emotional response happening inside us.
And then there's mood. How does that fit in?
A mood is, well, it's a more enduring affective state. It tends to be less intense than a specific emotion, and it usually lacks that clear, immediate trigger. You don't necessarily know why you're in a certain mood.
Right, like just feeling generally grumpy or cheerful for a while.
Exactly. And finally, affect. That's the broadest term we have.
Okay.
It's basically an umbrella that covers emotion, feeling, and mood, plus an individual's overall disposition, their general tendency.
So the big takeaway here is that emotions aren't just thoughts or ideas in our head.
Not at all. They profoundly impact our entire demeanor, our behavior, and even our physical health. They're whole system events.
It makes you pause and wonder, though. If we have this amazing capacity for complex thought, why did evolution even bother with emotions? Why aren't we just, like, perfectly rational beings? Almost like computers.
Right, and this is where it gets really fascinating, I think.
Yeah.
What's compelling here is that emotions are actually far more primitive, more instinctual than our complex consciousness. They evolved because they provided a quicker reaction.
Quicker.
Yeah, which was absolutely essential for survival back in the day. Rational thought can often get you to the same conclusion eventually.
Sure.
But emotions are like a physiological reflex, a primal shortcut, especially for simpler nervous systems. They can literally save milliseconds, maybe even hours.
And that could be the difference between life and death.
Absolutely. That's the evolutionary advantage.
So it's like our older brain systems had this super efficient pre-programmed survival kit, bypassing the slower conscious thought process. That's pretty ingenious.
It really is. Our sources actually call them superordinate mechanisms.
Superordinate mechanism.
Yeah, because they orchestrate other programs in the brain and body to solve adaptive problems. So when you face a threat, for instance, fear isn't just a feeling.
Right.
It's an instant survival protocol. It rapidly activates escape behaviors. It shunts blood away from digestion to your muscles, narrows your focus.
All geared towards getting away.
Exactly. They coordinate potentially conflicting outputs like, should I approach this or avoid it? And they sequence all the subtasks needed, making sure actions happen in the right order fast.
Wow. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And that brings us to the idea of basic emotions, right? The ones Paul Ekman identified, like happiness, sadness, fear.
Anger, surprise, disgust, yeah. He argued they were universally recognizable through facial expressions.
But it's not quite that simple, is it? I feel like I've read conflicting things.
It's definitely debated. While Ekman's work was foundational, other research suggests maybe fewer truly basic facial expressions. Some argue the differences we see are more sociological than purely biological. And then you have Lisa Feldman Barrett's constructed emotion theory, which is a really different take.
How so?
Well, she posits that emotions aren't just automatically triggered, they're actually created, constructed by a complex interplay of our body, our brain, our culture, and our upbringing.
So my personal history and cultural background literally shape how I experience, say, anger or joy.
That's the idea. It's profound, really. It suggests emotions aren't universal in the way we might think. They're more personalized constructions.
And it's not just a human thing either. Emotions aren't exclusive to us.
Oh, absolutely not. Emotions are incredibly widespread in nature. We see various levels of emotional display across almost every species of mammal. Many cephalopods like octopuses show them. Most birds, fish,
Even reptiles.
and reptiles show basic fear, which seems to be the simplest, most primal form of emotion observed across so many different species.
Speaking of primal beginnings, that leads us nicely to our own emotional story. How does our emotional journey actually start? Because it doesn't just switch on when we're adults.
No, definitely not. It starts incredibly early, and it's built on two core concepts, according to our sources. The first one is temperament.
Temperament, like our innate personality.
Sort of, yeah. It's an innate attribute, essentially a child's unique style or way of approaching the world. Our sources talk about 9 dimensions, but they often get grouped into 3 broad categories for simplicity.
Okay, what are those?
Well, you've got the easy or flexible kids. They're generally friendly, adapt easily to routines. You know the type.
Sure.
Then there are the active or feisty children. They might be fussier, have less regular schedules, maybe show really intense reactions to things.
Right, the more challenging ones sometimes.
Can be. And finally, the slow to warm up or cautious children. They tend to be shy initially, maybe withdraw from new situations, but they usually become more comfortable with repeated, gentle exposure.
And the key thing here isn't just the temperament itself, but how caregivers respond.
Exactly. That's the concept of goodness of fit. It's all about how caregivers adapt their parenting style, their expectations, to match the child's innate temperament. That flexibility is crucial for helping the child thrive.
Okay, so temperament is one building block. What's the second?
The second foundational concept is attachment.
Attachment theory. So important.
Hugely important. It begins right from the start with parental bonding. When caregivers consistently and sensitively respond to a baby's needs, picking them up when they cry, feeding them when hungry, it builds what Erik Erikson called basic trust.
That happens in the first year, right?
Yes, that first year is critical. This basic trust forms the absolute foundation for that child's sense of security, their self-esteem later on, and importantly, their developing ability to regulate their own emotions.
It's truly mind-boggling when you think about how much is happening inside that tiny brain, even before they can talk properly.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just external experiences shaping them, but their brain is literally sculpting itself in real time based on those interactions.
How does that work? What's happening neurologically?
There's incredibly rapid growth in the social and dynamic areas of the brain, especially in the nonverbal parts of the right hemisphere. Think areas like the amygdala, the limbic system. These are booming in the first 18 months or so.
Okay.
These parts are constantly processing all the stimuli from the environment, producing emotional responses, and actually building the body's stress regulatory systems. The amygdala, for example, is pivotal in sensing emotions and connecting them up to higher thinking areas and down to basic bodily functions.
So it's like their internal emotional framework is being laid down brick by brick based on those early relationships and experiences.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Can you walk us through some of the key emotional growth milestones we see as children develop? Like, what should we expect to see and when?
Sure. So right from birth, infants display those primal emotions: anger, joy, fear, through universal facial expressions. They can even briefly return a gaze, which is amazing.
Wow.
Within the first 1 to 2 months, you get that magical first social smile. Usually in response to high-pitched voices or smiles from caregivers. They also start recognizing caregivers' smells and voices.
I know.
By 2 to 3 months, they're beginning to learn how to physiologically regulate themselves, how to calm themselves down a bit. That's a huge step towards self-soothing.
Okay, so starting to manage their own state.
Exactly. Moving on, around 4 to 5 months, you start seeing turn-taking vocalizations, little coos back and forth, and they recognize their primary caregiver by sight.
And then we get into the second half of the first year.
Right. Between 6 and 12 months, that effective attachment relationship really solidifies. This is also typically when stranger anxiety emerges, being wary of unfamiliar faces. Infants actively seek comfort from their caregivers when distressed, and towards the end of that first year, around 12 months, they're playing interactive games like peekaboo, using gestures like pointing.
Becoming little communicators.
Definitely. Then, fast forward to about 15 months. This is where we start seeing the emergence of empathy and self-conscious emotions.
Like what?
Like, a child might get genuinely upset when they see another child crying, or they might show clear pride when they're applauded for doing something.
Ah, okay. That's fascinating. And this leads into the toddler years, right? The infamous terrible twos.
Precisely. Between roughly 18 and 30 months, that drive for individuation and autonomy really kicks in. Me do it. They start engaging in pretend play, like talking on a toy phone. You also see parallel play, where they play alongside other children, but not necessarily with them yet.
Okay.
And this is also when they start getting clever with emotions. They might learn to put on a poker face or dutifully say thank you for a gift they clearly don't want.
Little manipulators in training.
Well, they're learning social rules. And yes, this is prime time for possessiveness, mine, and negativism. No, it's all part of establishing their sense of self.
So they're not just feeling emotions anymore. They're starting to use them strategically in social situations. It's like they're figuring out the game.
That's a really good way to think about it. Then from about 30 to 54 months, so preschool years, you see further development in impulse control, understanding gender roles, and navigating peer relationships.
Play becomes more complex.
Much more complex. Symbolic play really takes off, and cooperative play emerges. Now they can play with 1 or 2 peers, sharing goals, taking turns, and around 4 years old, they generally learn to distinguish fantasy from reality.
And then adolescence. That's a whole other level of complexity.
It really is. Adolescence brings a surge towards greater independence, a huge commitment to the peer group, navigating incredibly complex social and romantic relationships, and learning to cope with significant stress, ideally, with healthy guidance from adults still in the picture.
Now, this detailed timeline raises an important question. What happens when children don't seem to meet these age-appropriate milestones?
Yeah. That's a critical signal. The inability to reach these milestones or significant delays can often indicate underlying psychosocial disturbances. Well, our sources mention conditions like autism spectrum disorder, various anxiety disorders, ADHD, things that impact social and emotional functioning. It's also really crucial to recognize the impact of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs.
Right, trauma, neglect, difficult home environment.
Exactly. Those experiences can significantly alter a child's developmental trajectory. It's not just about what's happening internally. The environment plays a massive role.
So screening for things like family dysfunction or maternal depression is really important.
Absolutely vital. Because early intervention makes a huge difference. And it often requires an interprofessional team approach. Meaning pediatricians, psychologists, social workers, maybe educators, all working together to provide comprehensive support for both the child and the family. It really takes a village sometimes.
It really does. Okay, so all this fascinating developmental stuff brings us back to ourselves as adults trying to navigate our own inner worlds. And I think a really common experience, something many of us do, is when we feel overwhelmed by difficult emotions, like fear or worry. We try to escape, right? We distract ourselves, throw ourselves into work, or just mindlessly scroll on our phones for hours.
It's such a common trap, almost an instinctive reaction. But our sources really emphasize that the more we try to run from our feelings, the more they tend to chase us down. It just seems to magnify the confusion, the suffering, and ultimately it leads to burnout and exhaustion. Suppressing emotions, as one personal account powerfully put it, just makes us more miserable in the long run.
So the advice then, counterintuitive as it might sound, is to stop running, to actually lean into the discomfort.
This is where it gets truly transformative based on the research. Habitually accepting our negative emotions and thoughts, not fighting them, not judging them, just allowing them to be there, it doesn't make them stronger.
It doesn't.
No. In fact, studies consistently show it leads to significantly greater psychological health. We're talking higher well-being, more life satisfaction, and dramatically lower levels of anxiety and depression. It's a profound shift.
That's a really powerful insight. How does that actually work, though? How can accepting something negative lead to less of it?
It seems that acceptance helps prevent us from layering on that second wave of negativity. Getting anxious about feeling anxious or getting angry at ourselves for feeling sad.
The reaction to the reaction.
Exactly. Acceptance short-circuits that. It helps prevent us from exacerbating our negative mental experiences when stressors hit, and this leads to lower overall negative emotional responses over time.
And importantly, this doesn't numb you out to good feelings.
That's a crucial point. Acceptance doesn't seem to attenuate positive emotions at all. It selectively targets the negative ones, allowing positive experiences to remain vibrant. It's about smarter emotional processing, not emotional suppression.
Okay, so we need to be clear. We're talking about accepting our internal mental experience, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations.
Yes.
Not necessarily passively accepting a difficult external situation if it's something that actually needs changing.
That's a very important distinction. Accepting your feelings about a bad situation is beneficial. Simply accepting a bad situation that you could potentially change might even be maladaptive. It's about the internal landscape.
Got it. So what are some practical ways we can actually practice this acceptance, this navigation? How do we do it?
Well, one powerful strategy our sources suggest is, perhaps surprisingly, to invite them in.
Invite the bad feelings in.
Sort of, yeah. Instead of pushing away emotional discomfort, the idea is to gently invite them in and hang out with the pain and discomfort.
Okay.
It means consciously paying attention, noticing the physical sensations, maybe that tightness in your chest, the sweaty palms, noticing the thoughts that are swirling around, and then validating those feelings, telling yourself, okay, this feeling is here, it's uncomfortable, but it's okay that it's here. And just focusing on them gently, allowing your brain the space to process and eventually release them.
It sounds like building a muscle. It takes practice and maybe confronting some stress.
It really is like building a muscle. It's a skill that requires practice, especially when things feel intense.
And another key strategy mentioned is simply putting feelings into words. Verbalizing seems really important.
Incredibly important. It helps us make sense of the internal chaos. And there are different ways to do it.
Like journaling.
Journaling is a great one. Just dedicating a few minutes each day to write down whatever thoughts and feelings come up. No need for perfect sentences or structure. One source said that magic is in the writing itself.
Okay, what else?
Talking to a friend can be huge. A friend who really listens, who doesn't just jump in with advice, but maybe mirrors back what they hear you trying to say, that can bring so much clarity and really lift a heavy burden.
Yeah, feeling heard is powerful.
Definitely. And even self-talk can work for simpler issues. Just articulating your thoughts out loud to yourself, maybe while you're on a walk, can help clarify your thinking.
It's like that analogy our sources used. Just naming a physical issue, like getting a diagnosis for a weird spot on your skin, even if it's benign, can reduce anxiety immediately, even before you have a treatment plan. The act of labeling brings relief.
That's so true. It takes away some of that scary unknown quality. It grounds the experience.
And another set of tools mentioned involves mindfulness and self-compassion. How do they fit in?
Mindfulness helps us practice that self-reflection piece. It's about paying attention to the present moment, non-judgmentally, becoming aware of what's happening both inside us and around us.
And that helps with intense emotions.
Research suggests it helps reduce those acute, overwhelming responses to trauma and stress. It allows us to process emotions, to kind of work them out of the body faster, rather than getting stuck in them.
Our sources mentioned the 2 arrows concept here. I found that really insightful.
Yes, the 2 arrows. The first arrow is the inevitable pain of life, setbacks, losses, things that just happen to us. We can't always avoid that first arrow.
Right.
But the second arrow is the suffering we add on top of that pain through our thoughts, our judgments, our resistance. This shouldn't be happening. Why me? I can't stand this feeling.
Oh, okay.
Mindfulness helps us notice that second arrow as we're about to shoot it at ourselves. It gives us a choice point, allowing us to respond with more wisdom and less reactivity. It helps us remove that added suffering.
And self-compassion comes in here too.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating an attitude of kindness, non-judgment, and understanding towards ourselves and our own emotional responses, especially when we're struggling. Treating ourselves as we might treat a friend who's going through a hard time.
That sounds nice, but maybe hard to do in the moment. Are there specific ways to practice it?
Our sources offered 3 helpful vantage points you can try. First, the anchor view. Grounding yourself in the present moment, maybe focusing on the physical sensation of your breath.
Okay, just anchoring.
Second, the child view. Bringing a sense of curiosity to your inner experience, like, isn't this interesting what my mind-body is doing right now? Maybe practice this with less intense emotions first.
Like an observer.
Kind of, yeah. And third, the compassionate parent view. Actively responding to your own distress with caring and understanding, imagining how a wise, kind parent might comfort a distressed child, offering yourself that same warmth.
That takes practice, I imagine.
Definitely. It's a conscious cultivation.
Now, it sounds like a lot of this assumes we can actually identify what we're feeling in the first place. But our sources also brought up something called alexithymia. What's that about?
Alexithymia is a really fascinating condition. It's characterized by difficulty identifying feelings and distinguishing between feelings and the bodily sensations of emotional arousal.
So emotions aren't instinctively obvious for people with alexithymia.
Exactly. They often have to logically deduce what they might be feeling by analyzing their own behaviors, their thoughts, the physiological responses like noticing their heart is racing and thinking, okay, that usually means I'm anxious or excited.
Wow.
They might even use tools like a feelings wheel chart to help build their emotional vocabulary and connect physical states to emotional labels.
It really highlights that for some people, understanding emotions is a very conscious, analytical process, not just an innate knowing.
It absolutely does. A very different internal experience.
Okay. Moving beyond our individual experience then, it's crystal clear that emotions are also a fundamental part of our social fabric. It really feels like they're a form of communication that probably evolved way before complex language.
Oh, I think that's almost certainly true. Emotions are powerful ways we convey our internal states to others. Think warning cries for predators, expressions of care for offspring. This would have been absolutely vital for group survival and coordinating social interactions throughout human evolution.
And it seems like our ability to connect with other people is directly tied to how well we understand ourselves and our own emotions.
It really is. That self-awareness provides the foundation for empathy and understanding others' emotional states.
So our sources talk about emotions having these dual functions in society. They can bring us closer, or they can create distance. Let's talk about how they foster affiliation first.
Well, the obvious ones are positive emotions, right? Happiness, admiration, gratitude, these clearly promote group cohesion, bonding, cooperation.
Makes sense.
But what's really interesting is that even some negative emotions can serve an affiliative function. Think about regret, embarrassment, sadness, guilt, even shame. When these are shared appropriately within a group,
It builds connection.
it absolutely can. Sharing any emotion, really, whether it's positive or negative, can strengthen social bonds. There's a process of co-regulation that happens when we share vulnerability.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like acknowledging shared humanity, the we're in this together feeling.
Exactly. But then, of course, there's the flip side, social distancing.
Right. How do emotions push us apart?
Well, emotions like anger, contempt, disgust, or fear directed towards another person obviously increase social distance. They signal threat, disapproval, or a desire to withdraw. These are sometimes called socially disengaging emotions. And interestingly, they might be more readily expressed or seen as acceptable in cultures that place a higher value on independence and autonomy.
And this can happen at a group level too.
Oh, definitely. Group-based emotions can be incredibly powerful. They can foster strong bonds within an in-group while simultaneously creating significant distance and antagonism towards out-groups. Think about group-based anger being used to challenge social hierarchies or injustices.
So expressing our emotions or not expressing them has real ripple effects across all our relationships.
It absolutely does. Our sources suggest that habitually suppressing emotional expressions, even just between strangers in a brief interaction, can be dysfunctional. It leads to less emotional rapport, less connection.
And over time, poor relationships.
Potentially, yes. And there's another fascinating finding related to power dynamics.
Oh, yeah.
Research indicates that individuals who feel a high sense of power can sometimes become less emotionally responsive to a conversation partner's distress. They might not tune in as much.
And that makes the other person feel less understood.
Precisely, which obviously impacts the connection.
And of course, emotions can be used deliberately to influence others, even manipulate them.
Unfortunately, yes, we've all seen it. Our sources mention terms like exploitative induction or disingenuous displays.
Like exaggerating sadness to get sympathy or help.
Exactly that kind of thing. Emotions are undeniably potent tools in social interactions, and they can be wielded for less than genuine purposes.
So just to wrap this section up, it sounds like we need to distinguish between an emotion's intrinsic function, what it evolved to do, and its actual effect in a specific social situation.
That's a perfect summary. While emotions have these built-in social functions, You know, fear helps us hide, anger prepares us to attack, affection helps us bond. Their real-world effects depend entirely on how they're expressed, when, to whom, and the whole social context.
So anger, for example.
Right. Anger might increase social distance immediately, feel very disconnecting. But if it's expressed appropriately, say, to address a genuine boundary violation in a relationship, it can actually be constructive in the long term.
Interesting.
Ultimately, our sources suggest that social well-being involves navigating this constant balance between affiliation and cooperation on one side and distancing and competition on the other. Emotions are the tools we use to manage that complex dance.
Wow, what a journey we've been on today. I mean, from the primal power of emotions rooted deep in our evolution to seeing how critical they are in childhood development and now understanding these powerful tools we have for actually accepting and expressing them as adults.
It really reinforces that core message, doesn't it? Emotions aren't just these fleeting, fuzzy feelings. They are deeply ingrained, incredibly adaptive mechanisms. They profoundly shape our reality, our relationships, our physical health, our overall well-being. Understanding them really does feel like unlocking a kind of superpower in our complex modern world.
It really does. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening.
Yeah.
The next time you feel a strong emotion rising up, instead of immediately trying to push it away or rationalize it,
Yeah.
perhaps just pause for a second
Yeah.
and ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to tell me right now?
Mm.
Or what is it trying to help me leave? The answer might be more profound, more helpful than you think.
I love that. That's our deep dive for today. We genuinely hope you gained some surprising insights, maybe a few aha moments,
Yeah.
and feel maybe a little more equipped, a little more confident navigating your own emotional landscape.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration today. We really do love digging into these fascinating topics with you.
We do. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, please maybe consider liking it, sharing it, or leaving a comment wherever you happen to listen.
It really does help us reach more curious minds just like yours.
And make sure to come back next time for another deep dive into the things that make our world and ourselves so incredibly fascinating.
Goodbye for now.
See you then.